This week on Conservative Crossroads, Oren Cass and Michael Doran debate America's policy towards Israel.
We have, I think, tended to become overly entangled in what might be very strong Israeli interests, but are not necessarily strong U.S. interests.
There are a lot of voices in the MAGA coalition these days, led by Tucker Carlson. They're looking at this small country with outsized interests and saying, aha, they must be manipulating us. That picture is 180% wrong.
Mike Doran and Oren Cass on Conservative Crossroads, coming to you. Welcome to the first episode of Conservative Crossroads. Conservatives have rarely held the current degree of power at all levels of the United States that they hold today. And unsurprisingly, differences between types of conservatives have emerged now that they're on the offense. Many conservatives want to shy away from openly talking about them, believing that public unity is paramount. This show disagrees with that idea. Conservatives can only remake America if they know what they are for, rather than create a false unity by simply focusing on what and who they are against. Our inaugural program today looks at what U.S. policy towards Israel should be. Joining me are Mike Doran, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, and Oren Cass, founder and chief economist at American Compass. It was mutually determined before the broadcast that Oren would go first. Oren, you have 5 minutes to explain what you think American policy for Israel should be.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Henry, and thank you, Mike, for joining for this conversation. I think it's obviously an incredibly important and timely one for the United States in general, but especially on the right of center, where, as in so many topics, we're seeing a lot of questioning of longstanding dogma, some in, I think, very constructive directions, some in less constructive directions. And I think it's a place where we really do need a rethinking of American policy, but we need to come out the other side of it with a careful and coherent vision that continues to advance certainly the American interest and does so in a way that's consistent with conservative principles. So I guess I should say I come to this question. In my mind, it's in a sense two questions. There is both what should formal U.S. foreign policy be toward Israel. I also think there's a related question of what should the conservative movement's posture essentially toward Israel be. And so I will take those in turn. I think when it comes to our actual foreign policy toward Israel, my view and what I would advocate for the United States is that, I think Israel is a very good ally in many of the ways that any country, certainly the United States, should look for an ally. I think we have a general commonality of values and as a result of interests. I think we have historically had a quite good relationship. And I think there are many ways in which we benefit from maintaining that relationship, whether that is in terms of intelligence sharing, whether that is in terms of technological development, in some cases even joint military or diplomatic action. And I think the United States should aim to maintain that. My concern is that Israel has, I think, tended to have a special status as a U.S. ally that looks very different from what you would otherwise say, as I just said about Israel, about Korea or Australia. Israel occupies an outsized position in our politics, and we have, I think, tended to become overly entangled in what might be very strong Israeli interests, but are not necessarily strong U.S. interests. And obviously where the rubber meets the road as a matter of just a very tangible question is whether the United States should be providing essentially foreign aid to Israel. I know it is argued, well, we give them the money and then they turn around and buy the weapons from us. So if we want to ignore the fact that we're giving them money and just say we're giving them weapons, we can. Regardless, the question is why would we be giving them anything? They are a quite wealthy market economy with a strong government and robust defense spending and perfectly capable of acquiring by their own means the equipment and material that they might need. And so I think it's a good illustration where I think, as we would think about any other ally, the clear answer should be that we don't need to be providing aid to Israel. We should be happy to sell them weapons as we do to other allies. But as soon as we get into arguments about why we might need to be offering them aid, I think we start to see that we are not engaging in the relationship in a way that really best advances U.S. interests, or frankly, in the long run, advances Israeli interests. Because with such entanglement comes all sorts of other implications about the say we believe we should have over their actions in ways that I don't think we want to take responsibility for, and they don't want to necessarily hear. And so I think a slightly more arm's length and conventional allied relationship would be a lot better. The second and related point then comes to the conservative movement, where it seems to me that for some time now, political leaders in the United States have been just particularly and overly solicitous of issues related to Israel. I mean, a very obvious example is if you can look in the 2024 Republican platform. I believe Israel is the only country mentioned positively. There is a separate call out for "we will stand with Israel." And I don't know why that's there. We wouldn't put "we will stand with Korea," "we will stand with Australia," "we will stand with Japan," "we will stand with the United Kingdom." Obviously, in the context of our alliances, we should stand with these countries, but we should be doing so in a measured and balanced way. And I think it's impossible to reconcile a clear-eyed view of American priorities with the way a lot of Republican politicians at times focus on Israel-related issues, and the way in which we have activist groups that attempt to elevate what are, from the American perspective, I think, third-order concerns to first-order concerns. And so again, just to wrap up by putting a very tangible point on it, I would say the question is, what does the term pro-Israel mean? Why do we ask of politicians, are you pro-Israel, in a way we would not about any other country, about any other relationship? I am pro-Israel in the sense that I think Israel is generally a force for good in the world, and I think they are and should be a good American ally. But pro-Israel isn't how I would describe the relevant policy choice. I would say that I am pro-America, and to the extent that an alliance with Israel is healthy for America, we should pursue it, but that it is not good for our foreign policy to be separately asking whether our policies are oriented toward the benefit of a particular other country.
Well, Mike, what do you think American policy towards Israel should be?
Thank you for having me, Henry, and Oren. Thank you for joining. My starting point is the Middle East rather than Israel. The question is, do we have interests in the Middle East, and what are they, and then how does Israel fit into that mix? There's a lot of sense in conservative world these days, particularly in the Trump coalition, that we need to pull back from the Middle East. Maybe even some people are even arguing leave the Middle East, and things that we're doing in the Middle East, such as our relationship with Israel, are sort of favors that we're doing to the region, and are doing for the region or for Israel. And I don't see it that way at all. The Middle East today is an important arena in our contest with China. The nature of international politics today is a struggle between the United States and China for global mastery. The Chinese want to create a Sino-centric global order, and they want to topple the United States from the throne of being the leader of the international order. Now, from an American point of view, the center of gravity of that contest with Iran, in military terms, is Taiwan. And I think every president, and of the last few presidents since Obama certainly has thought that the United States needs to pull back from the Middle East and pay more attention to East Asia. And I think every president has also heard a strong demand signal from the American electorate that they don't want another George W. Bush style invasion of Iraq in the Middle East. So there's going to be some recalibration in the direction of Asia less direct military intervention by the United States in the Middle East. But there's no possible way that we leave the Middle East. That would be like leaving one quadrant of the chessboard empty while we play chess against China in the other three quadrants. What's going to happen then? China will move into the quadrant that we are ignoring in order to use it to diminish us in all of the other quadrants. That's already the Chinese are already deeply involved in the Middle East and looking to undermine us there. We can go into that later if you want. So we need an allies in the Middle East that will help us shore up the American position and make sure that the Chinese don't use the Middle East to topple us from our throne. The Chinese are working in the Middle East primarily through the Iranians. That's the key relationship that allows them to project their power into the region. They're also getting oil from Iran at something like 50 cents on the dollar, depending upon how you calculate it. Iran, since 1979, has dedicated itself not just to the destruction of Israel, but also to expelling the United States, certainly from the Persian Gulf, but really from the entire region. So we're going to pull back from the Middle East, but we still have interests there, and we have an antagonist, Iran, that wants to kick us out. So we need allies who are going to share our values, share our concern for regional order, and who have capabilities that can look after our interests as we pull back. There are only two in the region, really, that have the total set of capabilities that we need, because the contest in the Middle East is a hard power contest. And we only have two allies that are capable of projecting power with their own militaries beyond their borders, and that is Turkey and Israel. So any new order in the Middle East in which our allies are going to do more of the work and we're going to do less of the work is going to include both the Turks and the Israelis. Of those two, the one that is closest to us in terms of worldview, has a history of working with us on all levels, is Israel. Israel is also tiny. It's only 10 million people, but it has outsized capabilities. It is very much dependent on us. There are a lot of voices in the MAGA coalition these days, led by Tucker Carlson. They're looking at this small country with outsized interests and saying, aha, they must be manipulating us. They're looking at these statements of commitment from politicians and saying, obviously they're manipulating us. That picture is 180% wrong. It's exactly wrong. Israel is phenomenally responsive to everything the United States wants, and its capabilities are really at our service. The relationship we have is great. I think we should continue it the way it is. I know that that's probably not going to happen. Israel is the best ally that we have in the Middle East, and I think even really the best ally in the world because of those characteristics.
So, Oren, do you have something that you would like to ask Michael about?
Well, I suppose it would be useful to dive into some of the more concrete areas of difference, because I think I'll agree with a lot of what Michael said about the fact that the obviously healthy relationship between the United States and Israel is a positive for both sides. But I guess the question would be whether that supports the policy that we have been pursuing. And so to take something like, military aid as just a concrete example, it is fairly unique. It seems to me that there are very few countries like that with which the United States has this sort of relationship. It is a historical anachronism in a lot of ways, a function of peace deals struck 50 years ago. If we were not already providing that aid, it seems to me impossible to envision that we would start. And so my question for Mike would be, why are we doing that? And why is it a healthier relationship to have in which we are providing that sort of aid rather than one in which we are just engaging directly through the types of commercial transactions we do with other allies?
So I think there are a couple of answers to that question. First of all, I don't believe that this is different than what happens with other countries. I mean, we give aid to Egypt and Jordan. I think if you total the two of them together, it's it's close. I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but it's probably about the same as what we give to Israel. We give aid to Japan. We don't name it in terms of aid, but we're guaranteeing the defense of Japan. And so we're subsidizing the defense of Japan, and that's going to be a number. It's not a budget item, but it's going to be a number that's a lot greater than the $3.8 billion a year that we give to Israel. So I don't agree with you, first of all, that this is some kind of completely different category. But I also think it's a mistake to think that we're giving this to Israel rather than looking after our own interests. And let me just give a couple of examples. First of all, as you mentioned before, that aid almost entirely gets recycled back to American arms manufacturers. So it's not not that it's money that allows Israel to buy stuff from us. And that is incredibly important to us in a variety of ways, because number one, it means that we maintain leverage over Israel. Israel's a cyber superpower. There are only five in the world, and that's China, Russia, the United States, Britain, and Israel. So Israel's a high tech, not just a cyber power, but it's a high tech power. When we engage in research and development together with the Israelis, and also develop weapons systems with the Israelis, we get a lot from that. We get their experience, their abilities, not just on the front, not just on the manufacturing end, but afterwards when they're deployed. Israel is the only place in the world where we get real-time combat data coming back to us about how our systems are working. That's absolutely invaluable, and that's one of the things that keeps American weapons so much better than any of the competitors. If it just becomes a commercial transaction with the Israelis, then the Israelis are also free to go wherever they want. And not just they don't have to just work with the United States. So we lose some of the leverage we have over them. There's another thing that nobody ever talks about too, which is how much. And I don't have these numbers at my fingertips, Oren, but how much money does Israel invest back into the United States directly? As part of when we that 3.8 billion, when they take that money and they develop weapons with the United States, they don't simply the investment doesn't stop with that 3.8 billion. They then take money from their own budget and put it into American industries here in America. It'd be worth totaling up how much direct investment, I'm talking about purely in military terms, direct investment you get from the Israelis into our economy. I'd be willing to guess that would reduce that 3.8 billion significantly if we were to subtract that from the 3.8 billion. But there's one last item I would mention here too, which is that this relationship we have with Israel is unlike any other, not in the sense of the affinities that people have for Israel, but because Israel is so tiny and it is a high-tech superpower, it means that they are great. What the Israelis are great at is startups and innovation, but they can't scale. So what happens is everything that they start in Israel gets sold into the American market and scaled in the United States. A lot of that is in the realm of military technology because that's where they one of the areas in which they particularly shine. So there's a whole secondary effect of this relationship that we have with Israel, in that it's a fantastic incubator of ideas that come out of Israel, actually that have already been tested and then get scaled by American industry. There's no other power on earth that can say that it is a feeder into our high-tech economy, anything like what Israel is.
So, Mike, I want to just jump in here. Prime Minister Netanyahu said over the weekend that he wanted to, as he said, taper off American military aid, and when pressed, down to zero within the next decade, so that Israel wouldn't be dependent on American pressure. And Senator Lindsey Graham has said on X that we should do the same thing, that we should reduce or eliminate U.S. military aid to Israel so that we can use that money directly for our own interests. Given that both Lindsey Graham and Prime Minister Netanyahu think that it's in their country's interest to eliminate the military aid, what does that say about your position on continuing that aid?
Oh, my position is going to lose. I'm going to lose this, but my position is the America First position. And what we have in our politics right now is this insane convergence of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Code Pink, or of Obama and Tucker Carlson. Because what Obama called for in the Middle East, Obama's argument was that the allies are the problem. They're dragging us into conflicts that are not in our interest, and we can stabilize the Middle East by pulling away from Israel and reaching out to Iran. That is also the Tucker Carlson position. And under Biden, after October 7th, we now know with a lot of detail that there was a de facto arms embargo. It wasn't called that. They did it through what the Europeans call an Italian strike. They slowed down all of the provision of weapons to Israel after October 7th in order to squeeze it politically. And now we have Tucker Carlson making exactly the same arguments and saying that Israel's this huge burden on us that is dragging us into all kinds of conflicts that are not in our interest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is what you get. You get Lindsey Graham is answering Tucker Carlson, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is answering Obama, Biden, and Carlson, and saying, look, if you guys are going to treat us, or you guys are going to say that we are a big problem to you, and you're going to use the dependence that we have on you in order to squeeze us in ways that are totally not in our interests, and I would add, not in the American interest, then okay, we'll sever that relationship in that way, and we'll have greater freedom. So what's going to happen is that this power, which I say is a small power with outsized capabilities, whose capabilities are almost entirely at the disposal of the United States, is being pushed by the United States into a position where its capabilities are going to be more independent of us. That isn't good for us. It's not America first. It's any empire worth its salt, and in this sense we are kind of an empire, would understand that having leverage and dependence over a small outsized power with outsized capabilities is the smart thing to do.
So, Oren, how do you respond to that?
Well, I guess it captures for me very well what I think is, in my mind, so frustrating about debates about Israel, particularly within the right of center, where, I don't know whether I'm Obama, Tucker Carlson, MTG, or Code Pink in this conversation. I'm pretty sure I'm not any of them. I guess I'm more somebody who doesn't think the United States should be an empire. And so I would agree with Mike that if the United States' goal is imperial domination, then a sort of client-state relationship with dependent countries like Israel might be part of the strategy. Certainly, we've seen it was part of the strategy in the past. It seems to me, though, somewhat question begging to frame that, though, as the America First view, because the position that I am attempting to articulate anyway is that the United States would be better off if it had allies who were allies in the conventional sense, and if the United States saw itself as a republic in the conventional sense, and if we did work closely together in areas of common interest, but where we did not try to develop these sorts of entangled relationships of dependence, which do then create exactly the set of dynamics which Mike described, where under one administration we're trying to leverage and squeeze Israel in one way, and under another administration you have Israel trying to leverage American political pressure in some other way, and then you have a conflict break out in Iran, which I think it is safe to say was a choice that Israel had made independent of the Trump administration strategy at the time, and so on and so forth. And so I take Mike's point that, yes, we also give money to Jordan and Egypt, but that seems to me to exactly underscore my point, which is that this is not a conventional relationship. It's an anachronistic result of decades old peace processes. And yes, we do have relationships that, quote, cost us money in the way that we commit to the support of other allies. I think we should continue to maintain that sort of relationship with Israel. But what I still have not heard and don't understand is why it is America first, or ultimately in the American national interest, to have a completely different relationship with Israel than we have with our other allies. And if, as Mike said, it is the case that Israel is very much dependent on us, then I would expect, I don't think that's because of the $3.8 billion. And so it speaks more to the strange, outsized, and unnecessary role that Israel has come to play in our foreign policy calculations than it does to a rational and coherent conservative approach.
Let me just quickly ask a question for you, Oren. As you noted that the aid to Jordan arose out of the 1994 peace treaty that we brokered between Jordan and Israel, and the aid to Egypt comes out of the Camp David Accords. That was the first Arab-Israeli peace treaty, and arguably set the stage for an elimination of what seemed to be the once-a-decade war between the Arab nations and Israel that attempted to eliminate Israel as a nation-state. Do you think that removing the aid to Jordan and Egypt would endanger those peace deals? And if they would, is that a price that you think it's worth American conservatives to consider paying?
No, I think there's zero chance it would have any effect on those peace deals. I can't imagine Mike disagrees. I'd be interested if he does, but I think it's pretty much impossible to envision Egypt or Jordan. What Jordan's relationship prior to '94 is even more difficult to put a finger on, maybe. But Egypt is not going back to the kind of posture it had toward Israel prior to 1970, late 1970s, and I guess I don't think anybody would actually contend that's why the money's going to these countries. I don't know. I'm very interested for Mike's thoughts on that, actually.
Mike, do you want to take issue with or respond to any of that? The question I posed or the points that Oren made?
Yeah, sure. I don't. I made a rookie mistake because I used the word empire, which allowed Oren to say we shouldn't be an empire, but we don't have it. We're a great power. We don't have a choice to not be a great power. We have interests all over the globe. We have interests in the Middle East. We have an interest in the global economic system. And in the alignment of countries in key regions. We build up dependencies or interoperability, whatever you want to call it, with countries all around the world. We use different mechanisms for doing that. In NATO, we use the NATO alliance. We use with Japan. We use our treaty with Japan. South Korea, our treaty with South Korea. In the case of Israel, we do it with military aid. These are just instruments for creating the same thing, which is influence and ensuring leverage in toward the ends that the shared ends that we have. If we cut Israel loose and say that everything is a commercial transaction between the two of us, then we open the door to Israel going and having commercial transactions with China. What do we say to Israel when Israel takes its enormous cyber and tech capabilities and puts them at the disposal of the Chinese military machine? China is the other power only other power on the globe that can take the Israeli innovation and scale it like the United States does. If Israel were to go do that, would we say, "Oh, so we're going to not have as many transactions with you anymore"? Clearly, in order to ensure that Israel remains in our camp and remains responsive to us, there has to be a set of other conditions besides the purely transactional economic conditions that are going to make them make those calculations. And the aid is part of it, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, let me ask you a kind of a dual question, which you said earlier that Israel makes their assets at the disposal of the United States. But the fact is, it's the only major U.S. ally that's refused to sanction Russia over Ukraine. It tried to broker its own peace deal when Prime Minister Naftali Bennett met with Zelensky. And China is already their second largest trading partner. So one can look at that and say, Israel's already triangulating between our major great foes, even when we have this. How would you respond to somebody were they to make that argument?
Well, first of all, I would look at every other Middle Eastern country, and China is the number one trading partner of every Middle Eastern country, number one, except Israel. So Israel is the only one where it's not number one. With regard to Russia. We on the day after Putin went into Ukraine, we suddenly demanded that all of our allies line up with us immediately against Russia, and we forgot the whole prehistory, which is that in 2015, 2016, the Russians and the Iranians moved into Syria. And you may recall the Turks downed a Russian fighter jet that crossed their border, and there was great tension between the United States and the Turks at the time because the Turks were concerned about the Russians setting up shop on their southern border. The Obama administration refused to do anything about it. So, in a sense, the United States forced its allies, Turkey and Israel, to accept Russia on their borders. And they each came to an accommodation. Both the Turks and the Israelis came to their own individual accommodation with the Russians, whom we did nothing to push back against. And then when the Russians did something that changed our view of them, and suddenly we thought, we have a problem, we turned to our allies and said, sanctioned the Russians immediately. I don't think the Israelis stand out in that regard. The Turks have also been triangulating with the Russians. The Saudis were triangulating with the Russians. Remember, the Biden administration went to the Saudis and wanted them to help them on oil and so on, and the Saudis refused. This is a consequence of the United States misreading the geopolitical map. We're in a contest between us on the one hand, us and our allies, and China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea on the other. If we had read that correctly, and we would have signaled properly to our allies all along, we wouldn't put them in this position where we whipsaw them, telling them one thing on Monday and another thing on Tuesday.
I have a question for both of you, and I'm not going to ask you to just, whoever wants to pop up first, but for both of you, kind of the unstated assumption is that there is an approach, there is a role for the United States in the Middle East, but you differ, I suspect, because you have strongly different definitions of what American interests in the Middle East are. You specifically, Michael, said that we had strong interests in the Middle East. You implicitly, Oren, implied that they were lesser than other regions by talking about the need, the primordial threat from China. Each of you tell me what concretely are American interests in the Middle East? What are we trying to achieve in the region concretely?
Well, it's funny. This was one of the questions I was going to ask you, Mike. So I will attempt an answer, but I think, as Henry said, I think you probably have a more robust conception here. It seems to me that the United States interest in the Middle East is quite similar to the broader or more generic United States interest in the broader world, which is that the United States wants to have ideally an economic and security partnership that includes as many countries as possible that are willing to engage on reciprocal terms and fair terms of trade and commitment to a strong security partnership. And it certainly wants that position to be strong enough that it doesn't need to be worried about finding itself at the mercy of an opposing coalition. And so whether we're talking about in the Gulf or in the Pacific or in Europe, I think there's a relatively comparable view of needing to sort of ensure that we don't have a hostile power that is asserting hegemony and pushing us or our own allies out. But insofar as that's not happening, I don't know that there's an awful lot we sort of need from the Middle East, so to speak.
Michael, how would you define our interest, our meaning the United States of America for my foreign listeners? How would you define American interests in the Middle East? What is it we're trying to accomplish there?
So we're in this global contest with the Chinese, and what it boils down to is a struggle for hegemony over Eurasia. I mean, it's a struggle for the whole globe for sure, but I think the center of gravity in terms of the contest, once we get beyond the narrow military contest over Taiwan, it's the question of influence over Eurasia, and we don't want the Eurasian landmass to be dominated by any single power or coalition of powers. And the danger here is that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea will form a bloc, and they will dominate Eurasia. We want a multiplicity of powers, and it's with that goal in mind that we should think about the Middle East, because the Middle East has it remains the center of the global energy market. And this is the oil and gas of the region are of enormous value, not just to China, which is poor in fossil fuels, but also all of China's rivals in East Asia, all of them, and that's Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and so on. They are all dependent on Middle Eastern oil and gas, and so. Right now, when we are the dominant power in the Middle East, we're holding China's energy supplies hostage. If there was a war over Taiwan and we were not the dominant power in the Middle East, then China would be able to hold all of its rivals, the energy supplies of all of its rivals hostage, and the global balance would shift immediately. It's also a crossroads between Asia and Europe, between Africa and Europe. Europe is also dependent on Middle Eastern oil. If China were to dominate there, and we're able to use its domination to impede trade through the choke points of the Middle East, but also to get preferential treatment from the oil producers in the region. They could use that to topple the United States from its position in Europe, as well, to pull Europe away from the United States. And then you can add other things in there as well in terms of the global terrorism. And as I mentioned, this is a coalition of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Iranian weapons are are a much more serious threat globally than we ever thought. They became a major factor in Ukraine. If the Iranians build ballistic missiles and were to give them to Venezuela, the chance of that now is lessened a lot, thanks to President Trump's policy on Venezuela. But if they were to go to Venezuela, they would be threatening the United States directly. So there's really no way to disentangle the Middle East from all of the other regions of the world that matter to us.
I have some follow-ups for Michael, but Oren, what do you want to say?
Well, I guess I mean I appreciate Mike's withdrawal of the term empire, but he has essentially just reasserted it that his conception of U.S. grand strategy should be the one in which, for instance, we are the dominant power in the Middle East, and that is the only way to prevent this parade of horribles. I think the reality is, first of all, that the United States is not the dominant power in the Middle East in that respect anymore. And I don't know that we have the resources or the capabilities to do it. And he left out all of those other countries who actually have the interests there. I mean, if somebody is concerned about China dominating Persian Gulf oil and so forth, India, Japan, and Europe might have something to say about it. The problem with Mike's vision, I would say, as he's putting it forward, is that it sort of promotes this learned helplessness where, of course, the United States must do everything, because if it does not, all hell will break loose. When in fact there are others who are better positioned, better, more and better incented to take these things a lot more seriously. And so it seems to me that the U.S. posture should not be one of withdrawing from the world and abandoning its allies, but it should be one that's based on a much more clear-eyed and realistic view of who's responsible for what. And that, of course, brings us back to where we started, which is the question of what should U.S. policy toward Israel be. And I think the challenge with the argument that Mike has been putting forward, to me, is that it comes across as essentially, well, we should treat Israel just like everybody else by treating them completely differently. And I just don't understand what the basis for by treating them completely differently is, when, let's be realistic, Israel isn't going to run off and join the China-Russia axis for the exact reasons Mike already underscored, which make them a good ally, which is that we do have shared values and interests and so forth. And so the idea that we sort of have to pay Israel money every year to keep them in our orbit, I think, is self-defeating. If that's the only reason they're in our orbit, then that's not much of an alliance. And seeing as it's not the reason they're in our orbit, we can't sell the policy on that basis.
Any response, Michael?
Sure. I didn't mention before, when we were talking about the role of the Middle East in the global contest between China and the United States, is also this question of AI. Middle Eastern countries, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are going to invest heavily in AI, and they have a number of qualities that are very attractive. They have, especially Saudi Arabia, they have land, they have money for investment, and they have no regulation. And just as the Saudis are the swing producer in the oil markets, AI could very well be, the Middle Eastern AI could very well be the issue that will determine whether the American AI ecosystem becomes the dominant one, or the Chinese system becomes the dominant one. And AI is going to play a huge role in the future in generating the industries that are going to lead economic growth, but also in military advances. So if we want to remain at the top of our game there, we have to be concerned about the Middle East. Oren says that that the Israelis will sort of naturally stay in our orbit if we don't work to keep them in our orbit, and I just don't see that. The Chinese will move into the Middle East at the first opportunity. We've already seen it. They have a base in the Middle East already. It's in Djibouti. We coded that base as an African base, not a Middle Eastern base, but it's 20 miles from Yemen, so it's a Middle Eastern base, and it's right on the Bab el-Mandeb, which leads to from the Indian Ocean to the Suez Canal, and the Chinese are setting themselves up around the choke points around the world so that they can control the shipping of critical goods. The UAE, a couple of years ago under the Biden administration, was about to hand a military facility to the Chinese, and the United States came down very hard on the UAE and prevented them from doing that. The Chinese are supplying drones to all of our allies in the Middle East except Israel. They're in the ballistic missiles game as well. The Saudis have Chinese ballistic missiles. The Chinese are absolutely crucial to the ballistic missile program of the Iranians. There is one power on Earth. There are two entities on Earth that have anti-ship ballistic missiles, and those are China and the Houthis. And the Houthis' capabilities come through the Iranians from the Chinese. The anti-ship ballistic missile is designed to attack American aircraft carriers. The Chinese are using the Houthi attacks on American shipping and on global shipping as a laboratory to hone this capability. There are two powers that can get through the Houthi blockade, the Bab el-Mandeb, or that could get through the Houthi blockade. Those are the Russians and the Chinese, because they have a deal with they have a deal with the Houthis. So this contest over the Middle East is already underway. And we shouldn't pretend that by doing less for our allies and pulling back from the region, that the region will just stay the way it is. It's in the political physics, it's in the physics of the international politics of the Middle East, that Middle Eastern powers need an outside guarantor. Every power has one. That's the nature of the game in the region. If we decide we don't want to play that game, okay, we've decided that, but let's be honest about what's going to happen. The Chinese are going to move in, and they're going to take the territory, and they're going to take everything that goes with it. And we're talking about all of the resources of Saudi Arabia, and we're talking about all the resources of the UAE, of Qatar, and of Israel. There's no way in hell that the Chinese set up shop around the region and Israel sits there and remains allied to us unless we give it the kind of guarantees that they have been accustomed to getting.
Oren, how do you respond to that?
Well, I guess I'm a little bit skeptical of the story of China on the march in this respect. I think certainly the Gulf states have proven themselves fairly interested in remaining aligned with the United States. And I think, again, we can look to other regions of the world, such as the Western Pacific, where China obviously has very strong interests, to say the least. But there are a number of market democracies that nonetheless are quite committed to resisting that and are increasingly committed to stepping up their own defense. And so I think, again, if we return to this question of what should U.S. policy toward Israel be, the the argument that I'm making that seems to me consistent with the set of interests that Mike is describing is that we should be good allies of our partners in the Middle East, just like we're good allies of our partners in other regions of the world. And I do think this connects back to the other piece I raised at the beginning, which is just this question of sort of how American conservatism engages the question, because it's very clear that this debate has taken on a different character than comparable ones about other regions of the world. And I think that goes both ways. I think you see an outsized interest in Israel in some cases, and I think you see a countervailing outsized frustration with Israel on the other side, neither of which is in the interests ultimately of a healthy relationship. And so at the end of the day, I mean, I think, a country like Korea is a very good example. And now, frankly, on the other hand, there are ways in which we have a much stronger and more explicit uh, commitment to Korea than we do to Israel. But the way that we approach it in defining our foreign policy strikes me as a lot more measured and rational. And I think it would be better for our interests in the Middle East, better for our relationship with Israel, uh, if we were able to bring about that kind of approach.
I only got about 10 minutes or so left, so I want to move us toward a little bit of conclusion, in part by asking about Iran. And we've got the millions of Iranians taking to the streets. We don't know exactly what's going on there because the dictatorial government has shut off phone and internet service. And of course, there are cries and calls that America should militarily intervene. It's clearly something that would be in Israel's interest because Iran has threatened to destroy Israel should it ever receive or obtain or develop a nuclear weapon. Should America intervene in Iran? Is the fall of the mullahs in America's interest, and should America directly commit military forces to ensure that happens? Mike?
I'll answer that directly and clearly, but can I just say one thing in response to what Oren said before?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I just want to make one point, and maybe we can pick it up at some other time. It's that the outsized role that Israel plays in our political debate has nothing to do with the $3.8 billion that virtually nothing to do with the $3.8 billion a year we give it. That money is going to disappear. I think I can see the forces that are moving the two sides to get rid of the aid so it's not a target are such that Oren is going to win this debate in terms of what's going to happen. In 10 years, there's not going to be any more $3.8 billion for sure. But that's not why Israel is at the center of our debate. There are 50 million American evangelical Zionists who are tied emotionally, theologically, absolutely committed to Israel. That's why it's the conservatives, the 70 or between 70-80% of the Jews vote Democratic. But it's the Republican Party that is the staunchest ally of Israel. No matter what the aid framework we arrive at in the end, that's not going away. The other thing is that historically Americans, whether evangelical Zionist or not, historically Americans have seen Israel as a sister state, and there are deep historical reasons for that. And this may seem irrational, but it's a fact, and there's nothing that any of us say here is going to change. Nothing that any of us say here is going to change that. Israel will always be in the center of our debate about foreign policy in a way that is totally different than any other country. With regard to your question, we have three overriding interests in Iran. I could add more, but there are three at the very top, and that's that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, Iran should not have the ballistic missile program and drone program that it has, and Iran should not be providing proxies around the region with the support that it's been giving them, all directed against us. It's in the interest of the United States that the president manage the crisis in Iran so that we end up with an Iran on the other end of this that does not have those capabilities. How he does that, you can skin that cat in a number of different ways, but that's the goal that he should be aiming toward. I'll make just one last point on Iran. The Tucker Carlson crowd, the Obama crowd, has it exactly wrong. They say that Israel is dragging the United States into this Iran conflict. Iran has always regarded the United States as the Islamic Republic has always regarded the United States as the great Satan and Israel as the little Satan. It is attacking Israel in order to undermine the American order in the region. Israel is getting attacked by Iran because it's America's ally.
Oren.
Well, on the Iran question, I guess I agree with Mike on his description of what a better end state might look like. The challenge for policymakers, of course, is to determine what policy choices would or would not push in that direction. And I think, unfortunately, there is not a lot of good reason to believe that the United States attempting to intervene in Iran would be successful or push it in a better direction in any reasonable time frame. I think the United States should take its limited resources, both literally and figuratively, and focus on those things that are most relevant to the interests of the American people and where we are most likely to have a positive effect. And that would be in strengthening the architecture of our existing alliances, which is not especially strong right now, and in focusing on the very many problems that we have here on this side of the ocean. So that would certainly be my hope for how the Trump administration approaches things. And I guess I would just pick up on something else Mike had said, because I think I agree with him somewhat as a descriptive matter. He's sort of describing ways in which various other factors in our politics lead to Israel being a sort of unique issue. I think that's probably right in a lot of ways, but it seems to me the purpose of any sort of deliberation, and certainly this sort of debate, is to focus on the normative question of what should be the case. And if if Mike agrees that the foreign aid sort of has become a flashpoint in an unproductive way, that speaks to the normative question of whether it's a useful element of our alliance. I don't think it is. I think when it comes to the sort of nature of the political focus, it's perfectly possible to have an American population that is favorably inclined to another country without saying, well, we therefore need to sort of have our foreign policy debates centered on it when those are not the questions that are actually most important to the well-being of the American people. And so, the purpose of this discussion in my mind is to have that normative debate about what would actually make sense and best advance our goals. And if that requires making a case to people about how they should think about things and what they should prioritize, then I think it's incumbent on us to do that.
We are at the end of our program. I'd like to give each of you, as I promised, a couple of minutes to make closing statements. We'll reverse the order. Mike, 2 or 3 minutes to sum up and say whatever you want to say about American policy toward Israel.
Well, thanks to both of you. I'll just make one very simple statement because you know what it's like when you leave one of these debates, you always think, I wish I'd have said this, I wish I'd have said that. And there was a point I wanted to make earlier, and I failed to make it, so I'll make it now.
Good.
And that's just that Oren said at one point that we there are lots of other powers in the world, India, Europe, you name it, that should be working in the Middle East for these interests that I mentioned. Um, it's true. They should be, but they don't have the capabilities. There's no way that they're going to develop them in the kind of time frame necessary in order to counter China, which is making real inroads in the region and which is the number one threat that we have to deal with. So we have to deal with the world the way it is. We built this world where everyone is dependent on us. We want to undo that now, and I understand why we want to undo that, and I understand the desirability of doing it in many cases, but we can't do it in such a way that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. In Israel, we have, unlike in Europe and unlike in East Asia, we have a very small country with enormous capabilities that is willing to fight and that can project power beyond its borders. This is exactly the kind of ally that we need in this day and age. And that's why Donald Trump has seen Prime Minister Netanyahu more than any other head of state, much more than any other head of state or head of government since he took office. And it's why he singles out Israel in his national security strategy as a special ally. It's a special ally not just because of our special feelings for it, but because of the special capabilities that it has.
Oren, last word with you.
Well, I actually really like the way Mike framed that, and I think this is a point of agreement for us, that the United States has pursued a grand strategy for a long time that envisioned the world being dependent on us, and that we told them to be, and we thought that would work well. And certainly my view is that was unwise and has not been working well, and we do need to change. I also think he's absolutely right that we need to change in a measured way and in a way that allows for time for others to adjust as well. And so I, think certainly as we think about any of these policy changes, it's not a matter of sending out a tweet tomorrow. It's about actually establishing a grand strategy that envisions the kinds of priorities and relationships that we want, and then applying it to specific instances, with Israel being one of them. And so, I actually also agree, as he said, that Israel is a uniquely effective ally in its ability to project power and to fight, and that's a good thing, and that in many ways we want to be telling our other allies, you need to do more of that. You need to spend less of your time looking over your shoulder and asking, have I done enough? Can I stop? Will the United States take care of me now? And spend more of the time taking care of yourself in a way. The problem, and this is where I think the policy change is so important, is that the way that the United States and the way that the Republican Party tend to engage with Israel is not actually conducive to that form of action. It creates a bizarre set of entanglements and responsibilities and accountabilities that we are frequently unhappy with, and that do not actually advance that vision of an ally that we'd like to see. And so, my hope is that we do have as an ally an Israel that can conduct itself in that way, that we do have as allies other countries that we've been talking about that can conduct themselves in that way. And I think the question is, what set of policies should we be adopting that push people's expectations of the United States and American expectations of other countries in that direction? A world in which Trump has spent more time meeting with Bibi Netanyahu than any other world leader seems to me very inconsistent with that vision and disproportionate to the set of interests that our country has. And so that's where I think we can do a better job.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Oren. And thank you, listeners. Please join me in 2 weeks for a new episode of Conservative Crossroads. Our topic: are tariffs good or bad for America? Take care.